but it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true.
Good evening, welcome along to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. Delighted to welcome Ben Jacobs to the show again. Hi, Ben.
How's it going? You say good evening. It's good morning for me. I'm in Chicago, so every time I wake up, I feel like I'm 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days even behind the news cycle.
Yeah, tell us what you're doing out there, Ben.
This is the Premier League Summer Series, so I've actually seen a little bit of Newcastle as well. I'm out with Chelsea, Newcastle, Brentford, Villa, Fulham, all clubs that I've seen and followed. And it's really interesting because the Premier League Summer Series has been an inaugural tournament and it has therefore multiple sides in one place, Premier League endorsed, which means that the kind of organisation is very similar to regular Premier League games with decent access, press conferences, what we call mix zones, which are the tunnel interviews that you do after the games. And it's been fascinating. And I think that for Newcastle in particular, it's a different pre-season because with Champions League football, and Leicester found this, by the way, when we won the Premier League as well, you have that added exposure. And with that added exposure, you have more opportunity. And with more opportunity, you have a higher caliber of opposition. So you end up actually going through pre-season, constantly playing very strong opposition. And I think that can be really useful and a decent test to, first of all, bed in youngsters, and second of all, work out where you're at directly compared to some rivals that Newcastle will be facing in only a few weeks' time.
What have you seen of Newcastle and what did you make of them?
I saw the Chelsea-Newcastle game and I've been across a couple of other Newcastle matches a little bit more from afar. I've either seen them on TV or the Villa game, for example, I was watching as well. And what we're seeing is a very organised team. We, I think, know that they're going to be very strong as far as that midfield engine is concerned. I think there's actually been, bizarrely, but maybe it's just because of rotation, a bit of defensive indiscipline. And that's something that is not particularly typical for Newcastle. If we look at the bedrock of last season, especially the first half of the season, it was all based on a consistent back four and not making any mistakes. So Eddie Howe will want to be sure that there's no sloppiness. And then I think up front, it's still going to be a case of trying to ensure that Miguel Almiron can find a way to get back to that first half of the season form. And if he does so, Newcastle will have goals there. Obviously, they need to bed in Harvey Barnes as well. And he should be a very positive signing who could potentially get into double figures as far as goals for Newcastle. And we know throughout the season as well, a more broader point, not too specific to pre-season, that Callum Wilson has to stay fit. And then at the back, one of the obvious things which Newcastle know is just how important Nick Pope is going to be. And he could easily stand out this season, as he was last season, as not just one of the top 3 or 4 goalkeepers in the Premier League, but he could step up even further and end up being the best goalkeeper in the Premier League. And I think that he more than most has looked very sharp and hungry. I think back to the Chelsea game and a couple of big saves, quality saves in pre-season, one late on, for example, from Conor Gallagher that would have won Chelsea that game. And that shows you ultimately that these Newcastle players have taken that kind of spirit and momentum from the season and they've not had a lull. It would actually be quite easy for Newcastle, having had so much spirit and chemistry and got Champions League football, to sort of take a sigh and a step back and a rest. But they've gone straight into the heat, and it has been literal heat, 30, 35 degrees here on the East Coast. They've gone straight into pre-season with a real energy about them, a real focus about them, a real purpose about them. So I get the sense, talking to Eddie Howe and those around the club, that this isn't about resting on laurels. It's not about thinking about what they've done last season. It's not about waiting for the Champions League draw. It's very much about making sure that pre-season kind of bleeds into the back end of last season. And as a consequence, they don't let any of their standards drop. And hopefully that will set Newcastle up for a very positive start heading into this campaign.
You touched on Harvey Barnes. What's he going to bring to Newcastle United?
He's going to bring a lot, I think. I suppose so much of the build-up to the window was more about Maddison and Newcastle. And as a result, Barnes was slightly more forgotten, which was a surprise to me, because I remember speaking to you and coming on the show in January and even last summer, and quite a lot of Newcastle fans were saying, we want Barnes off you, but it became about Maddison. And for so long, and that interest in Maddison was so genuine, that maybe with Barnes, there was an element of, did we only go for him because Spurs got James Maddison? I don't think that was the case at all. I think that Newcastle decided after they signed Tonali that they were not going to move for Maddison. And the thing about Barnes is that he had a very consistent season. Maddison was red hot up until his knee injury against West Ham just before the World Cup, and then wasn't quite the same. Still very good, but not quite the same. Whereas Harvey Barnes was extremely consistent for Leicester in a very poor season. So what you're going to see from Barnes is a few things. One is that he's a kind of lung buster type of player. So every time you see a close-up of him, he'll be rosy-cheeked and red in the face. He's giving 110%. He gets box to box, but not just box to box. It's kind of more like corner flag to corner flag at times. And I think that will go down very well with Newcastle. Don't be surprised to see him chasing a bunch of lost causes and therefore winning throw-ins and corners, or getting clearances even at the back occasionally that are unexpected. And Jamie Vardy at Leicester made that the thing when he set the tone of, you always keep running, you never give up on a lost ball. And I think that Barnes has come through and really bought into that mentality. So he always ends almost every single game completely shattered. And I think that that will go down well with the Newcastle fan base. I think the other thing that's really improved is his movement off the ball. So keep an eye on that. There's a lot of unsung work. There's a lot of subtle runs. He's always making himself available to receive the ball. And he's quite happy to linger quite deep on the shoulder of a midfielder or a defender and then really burst through. And he enjoys one-touch football and interchange and link-up play. So this is all very positive, because Newcastle are going to be really fluid in a 4-3-3. And Barnes excels, and he has that versatility. And then, of course, the thing that he was able to add to his game significantly last season was the goal scoring as well. And that is going to be important for Newcastle, because if you look at the bedrock of last season, a few players had to chip in. It was Almiron in the first half of the season, it was Isak in the second half of the season, and then it was Wilson kind of in between and chipping in left, right and centre. And then you get 4 or 5 goals from Bruno, 6, 7 goals from Joe Linton. So if Newcastle are going to replicate last season, they're going to need, I think, 5 players who are at or close to 10 goals. And it might be that Isak gets 20 and everyone else only needs 6 or 7. Or it might be that the top scorer at Newcastle is on 15, 16, and then they need people to chip in with 7, 8, 9. So this is where you look at Harvey Barnes, and his output in 21-22 was 6 Premier League goals, and his output in 22-23 was 13 Premier League goals, so more than double. So that's the challenge for Harvey Barnes now, is go to Newcastle in your first season and play with freedom and get 10 goals. And then because he can chip in with assists as well, he becomes a really useful player that can bring the best out of others, but also score 1 or 2 big goals of his own. So I think that his progressive passing has improved. His running off the ball is excellent. He's fit, he's fast, he's versatile, and that fluidity and chemistry that he brings, I think, is going to play very neatly into Eddie Howe's style.
Elliot Anderson and Lewis Miley have certainly taken the plaudits on this US tour. Good to see 2 Geordie lads, young lads, coming through. Elliot Anderson, of course, was on the fringes last year, made a few appearances, but really had a good pre-season, and waiting to see what he does in the Cellar Cup this weekend, but could be playing his way into contention to start against Villa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's not too many players out there who have come from League Two to potentially the Champions League in basically a year and a bit. And now it's a really crucial period for Elliot Anderson. He won't necessarily want to be only on the fringes of the team, and he's used naturally to some game time from his loan spell at Bristol Rovers. So now it's about Eddie Howe giving him a pathway, and it's also about Elliot Anderson's own ambition, because he's been one of the standout players on this pre-season tour. And if pre-season is anything to go by in terms of Newcastle recently, then when a player has that momentum and a standout pre-season, they get the opportunity. And we saw that with Miguel Almiron last pre-season, and I think we were speaking 12 months or so ago about Almiron, and is he going to be on the fringes? Could he be sold? Has he been a bit underwhelming? And suddenly he burst on the scene. All of that hard work paid off. And that's what players want, to feel like if they impress at pre-season, they're not just there to make up the numbers. They're there to stand a very realistic chance of not just success, but game time as well. And Anderson scored, I think it was 2 late goals, wasn't it? As Newcastle came from behind to beat Brighton. That was the game in New Jersey. And I hate to make the comparison because we know how Gaza was so sort of iconic, but there's definitely that element of Gaza. And I say element because I don't want to start making these like-for-like comparisons. It puts pressure on a young player. Gaza was unique. Nobody's going to be identical to Gaza in exact style and personality, but there is just that sort of confidence and innateness and rhythm that Gaza had. So I can understand why some might make those parallels. So now it's a really important season for Anderson, and from what I understand, Eddie Howe does see him as part of the plans for this season, and also sees him as just about the fittest player in the squad as well. So he's impressed with his attitude, he's impressed with his playing time, and he's also impressed with the training and application off the field as well. So all signs point to the fact that he will be a part of Newcastle's squad this season and get starts, because obviously Howe is going to have to rotate because of Champions League football. So at the moment, I would say that he's in contention for that opening game against Aston Villa.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis Miley, of course, making his way, but you know, he's already going to be in and around the squad this season, but probably following the same path as Elliot Anderson did last year. Fringe player, local lad, given an opportunity, and again, hopefully he'll follow in Elliot Anderson's footsteps.
Yeah, Miley seems really mature. Got to be honest, not a player that I knew a great deal about before watching him in this pre-season, but somebody that has really shown himself to be capable, I think, of handling the pressure of Premier League football. And he's only 17 years of age. And I think Eddie Howe's already hinted that he will break into the first team at some point this season. So he'd already made his debut for Newcastle, I believe, in the final game of last season. And that's important again, because Newcastle were able to use that for momentum heading into pre-season and now the new season. There'll be others listening to this show that know a lot more about Miley than me, because I've only seen a couple of games, but he's kind of quite lanky or tall, and he looks very accomplished on the ball, certainly not out of place, playing alongside Tonali, who might actually need even a bit more time than Miley to kind of get up to speed with this kind of style, even though Tonali's the one with the big price tag. And they were playing together in the game that I saw in the 1-1 draw between Newcastle and Chelsea at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And I think they looked relatively decent. So the Newcastle plan at the moment is to pretty much auto reject any loan offers for any clubs. So he is going to stay within the first team. And at 17, he looks physical. He looks quite tenacious. He looks quite intelligent on the ball. So definitely a big prospect ahead. And then it could well be that the window closes, and then in January, if he's not getting that many minutes within the first team, that's when they look at a loan deal. And I know that there's a couple of championship clubs that have inquired and been unable to get a loan deal. I know even my side, Leicester, were taking a little look to see whether anything might be possible, but now they're actually turning their attention to Cassidy at Chelsea instead. And I was also told that Stoke City were quite interested in the player as a possible loan deal as well. But Newcastle have been really clear at the moment and said that if anybody comes in for a loan deal, that will be rejected. So that tells you how highly the club rate him at the moment.
Okay, two major outgoings at Newcastle. ASM, first of all, off to the Saudi League. 23 million being the fee that's been mentioned, although it's non-disclosed. So, you know, where that figure's come from, I'm not so sure. And Carl Darlo heading to Leeds to be number one would imagine, making his debut this coming weekend, I think. But yeah, two outgoings, two off the payroll. What's your thoughts on both of those outgoings?
sad to see ASM go. Fantastic character, always engaged with the fans. But I think that it's kind of a move that suits all parties in many ways. And at only 26, he's got a real opportunity now to, yes, earn well, which is one factor in all of this, but be part of a growing and exciting Saudi Pro League. And it's not about moving there as a kind of retirement league. The fact that ASM goes and Neves has gone and Milinkovic-Savic has gone tell you that these mid-20s players also want a part of it as well. And if the league, as is expected, grows and progresses and becomes in the next few seasons a top 10 league and then a top 5 league, then ASM will have been a part of that. And I think that the game time he'll get there will be very useful. So from Newcastle's perspective, we know last season didn't really go according to plan. I think he only scored 1 Premier League goal. But if you look at the few seasons before that, he was more heavily involved, especially in 2021-22, when he played pretty much every Premier League game and he scored 5 goals. So now for ASM, I feel it's about unlocking or refinding his potential. And he'll have a real chance to do that at Al Ahly. And then who knows? He's been capped by France under 21. So can he make a step up, have a couple of good years and either put himself in contention for something internationally, or alternatively, can he do 2 years in Saudi Arabia and then at 28 still come back to Europe? And that's the beauty. If you move to Saudi Arabia at 26, earn well, set up your life financially for you and your family, then because you're not 30, 31, 32, you might shine and then return at 28 and still be able to play top European football and Champions League football for years to come. So this, for me, feels like a step back with respect to the Saudi Pro League in order for ASM to take a step forwards from a football point of view. And then it's a step forwards from a financial point of view, a lifestyle point of view, a brand point of view, an exposure point of view, because he's part of something huge. So it's kind of win-win for ASM, and the standard drop compared to the Premier League. And I don't mean any disrespect to any Al Ahly fans watching. I'm just talking purely in terms of like for like at the moment. The standard drop should help him get regular game time and find his form and enjoy his football. And then the financial gain is obviously a big part of it as well. So I think it suits everybody, including Newcastle United. And when you look at the fee, it's undisclosed, but it's nothing so insane that would imply there's anything untoward between effectively PIF negotiating with PIF. And that's generated a lot of media exposure. And we saw this with Chelsea as well. I think we had the conversation on this show. And it's quite funny how when it was Chelsea originally, and it was Koulibaly and it was Mendy and it was Ziyech, even though that move to Al Nassr for Ziyech failed, everyone said, oh, Chelsea are in collusion. Chelsea are somehow doing a dodgy deal with the Saudis. Chelsea are somehow offloading all of these players and it's helping them under financial fair play, even though none of those deals were declared on the last financial year. They were all only declared after July the 1st, because that's ultimately when the window opened as far as being able to get those deals done. But everyone pointed at Chelsea. Then it happened at Liverpool with Henderson and Fabinho. Then it happened to an extent at Newcastle with ASM. And suddenly everyone realizes that this is just what the Saudi league do. They're going to every single club. They're treating the club like a supermarket. They're offering sky-high wages. They're hoping the player wants to go. And then it's just about negotiating a fee. And some will say in this case that actually Al Ahly have got the sort of cut price deal. I think Newcastle fans would argue that ASM should be closer to 35 million euros than 25 million euros or whatever the final amount was. But the numbers are lower, and this is really important, not because anyone's giving the Saudis a cut price deal per se, although in some cases, if they want the players' wages off the books, they will be prepared, of course, to drop the fee. But that's not Saudi specific. That is just the transfer window. But the reason why the fees are a little bit lower is because the payment terms are incredible. So with a lot of these deals, it's either a lump sum or it's 2 payments. And because you're offering such preferable payment terms to the club selling, you're able to get a lower fee. And again, that's just the transfer window. That's just normal business. So I think now people realize that there's nothing really untoward in terms of any selling club specifically benefiting. This is just the Saudi strategy and the Saudi approach. And they're able to pull off these deals because they're effectively offering incredible payment terms and in many cases fees to the selling club, and they're offering incredible packages and wages to the players. So I just think that with ASM, sad to see him leave Newcastle, but it's a move that suits all parties.
Carl Darlo off to Leeds, been at the club a long time, didn't really do as well as he probably would have hoped or expected, but it's a new lease of life for him at Elland Road.
It is. It's a 3-year deal, so until 2026. He's 32 now, not ancient for a goalkeeper, but a key time in his career if he's going to leave and get game time. And you're right that he didn't necessarily do as well as he would have liked at Newcastle, but by the same token, I think he made over 100 appearances for the club since joining from Nottingham Forest, and he's obviously been there since 2014, a very positive influence off the field, but it's clear that game time is limited at the Northeast, and nobody ultimately is going to supplant Nick Pope. The only reason that Nick Pope won't play is if he's overloaded with game time. So we'll see rotation likely in the FA Cup and the League Cup, and then Nick Pope will play if he's fit in the Premier League and the Champions League. And that's just the reality of the situation. So Darlo is very clear, and was also before he left Newcastle, that his ambition is to be a starting goalkeeper. And it looks like he's going to get that at Leeds United. So it's a really good move for, again, all parties. And obviously, if everything goes according to plan for Leeds, we might see Darlo back in the Premier League again next season.
Okay, we've touched briefly on ASM's move to Saudi. What's your take on the Saudi League then, Ben?
Well, I think with the Saudi League, we have to be very respectful of that. It's formative. So this is a new strategy, and it's going to take time, not just 3 to 5 windows, but that's probably the first period to judge it on. But I would say 3 to 5 seasons. So that actually is double that amount of windows, therefore. And with the money they've got and the ambition of PIF and the roadmap that we've seen in other sports, particularly Live Golf, and they're trying to break into tennis as well. They've got Formula One and boxing. I think anyone underestimating it or dismissing it as a retirement league is highly foolish, because we've seen with these other sports the success they're able to make of those sports. And golf is that prime example, effectively taking on the PGA Tour and being able to win and shaking up the very format of golf. So I think with the Club World Cup being hosted in Saudi Arabia this year, and with the expanded Club World Cup in America in 2025, and it being very possible on top of that, that the winner of the Champions League might even play an exhibition game against the winner of the Asian Champions League. And I say that because we've already got one in place of the winner of the Copa Sudamericana playing the winner of the Europa League. So football is changing, formats are changing, and Saudi Arabia are there at the forefront of it, trying to buy a seat effectively at the top table. But rather than just throwing money for the sake of money, there's a strategy in place. And this isn't just top players moving. There's top recruitment experts and scouts. There's top marketeers. There's top communications experts. There's top creative-minded people. And this is just the start. So if they're getting ASM, if they're getting Neves, if they're getting Milinkovic-Savic, they've already got Ronaldo, they've got N'Golo Kante, they've got Karim Benzema, they've got Riyad Mahrez. That was a big one as well. If they're getting these players now, then by this time next year, who else might they attract? And 20 names can very easily become 50 names and 100 names. So the priority is basically, first and foremost, to focus on the PIF clubs. So therefore, to strengthen the standard of the ones they think are going to win things, the ones they think are going to succeed. And therefore, we're seeing Al Ahly, Al Hilal, Al Ittihad, who are the defending champions at the moment. And that's kind of significant because they're going into the Club World Cup. So they're the ones that kind of, they really want to strengthen first, because they're actually the ones that are kind of going to be in the world stage a little bit later. And that's kind of why Kante and Benzema went there. And that's quite significant, I think, because they're maybe going to be one of the sort of first big ones that we see really develop. And then Al Nassr's obviously the other one with Cristiano Ronaldo, etc. So those 4 are the big ones, and 2 of them are in Jeddah and 2 of them are in Riyadh. And as they develop, there'll be 4 big clubs in Saudi, and that's the first part of the strategy. And then after that, you're thinking about Al Ittifaq, maybe Al Shabab, and a few others that are not part of the big 4, but could still be built. And the money is going to trickle down to everybody eventually, and that's because it comes from the top. It comes from the Ministry of Sport, and they've allocated £17 billion to spend between now and 2030 on this project. So I don't think this is a Chinese Super League that's going to be a flash in the pan. The key question will obviously be, what's the first experience of the first batch of players that go out there? Do they enjoy it for them and their family? Are they paid on time? Because obviously at the same time as Al Nassr are trying to sign players, they've been in a transfer ban because they've not paid add-ons due to Leicester for the historical transfer of Ahmed Musa. And that number was only about £420,000. And this was before PIF took control of the club. But it tells you that there has been a historical problem in Saudi Arabia around player disputes and around club disputes and paying money. So that first experience is going to be really key. But I think the Saudi League is here to stay. I think it's a real threat to some of the major European leagues. I think less so to the Premier League at this point. But I think young French talent that would normally go through the likes of Nice and Monaco might go to Saudi instead. So the Spanish league, the French league, the ones where they might target because they realize there's a lot of young talent at value that they can develop. And as a consequence, I think we have to see Saudi Arabia as a player. And I think the last thing on this sort of Saudi rant that I would say is, why shouldn't Saudi do this? So, of course, as journalists, we have to make sure that it isn't only a rewriting of the past with a very positive future. We have to put scrutiny on things, as I've already alluded to, like unpaid bills. And that's not a political thing. That's just a reality. If they've signed a player and not paid the player what they said they paid the player, and there's a dispute with FIFA, then we can't only get excited about the money paid to ASM without pointing that out. That's the point I'm making. But we also can't just bash the league and say that they're just trying to buy it for soft power. They're trying to buy it to get some shortcut head start to dominate football. This is football. And the Premier League did it when there was a foreign influx, and they continue to be able to do it because they have the money and the muscle and the global appeal. So if you like the Premier League because it's become global, then if another league tries to use its financial clout to become global, personally, I don't think we can say that's ruining football. I think that is just the direction of travel for football. And I'm sure when the Klinsmans, the Zolas, the Ginolas came to the Premier League, I'm sure there were Spanish football fans, Italian football fans, especially Italian football fans, because Italy was the big league in the 90s. Everyone remembers watching the highlight show on Channel 4. I'm sure those fans said, wow, this is a disgrace. Football's being ruined. The English league has got all of the money. They're stealing all of our players. How dare they? Our league is ruined. Our love for football is ruined. You know, the Italian league should have Italian players, the best players, and should be the one that, sets the tone. I'm sure that was said. I was too young, but I'm sure that was said. And now Saudi are doing it and everyone's saying football's ruined. But I just think it is football and it is the direction of travel. And ultimately, if the players keep joining and the league keeps growing and it succeeds, you have to sort of jump on the bandwagon, or ultimately you're going to fall behind.
Okay, halfway through the show, time for the ads.
A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. You can find them at skipsandbins.com or telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Website skipsandbins.com. Easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Big thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces handmade in Cumbria. You can order them from their website, mrvickys.co.uk, or by telephoning 01768 210 102. A big thanks also to New Workwear. You can find them at newworkwear.com. They are an agile and dedicated workwear provider. Welcome back as well to United Travel. They are a UK coaches firm and they are based in the Northeast. They've got 2024 tours, and you can contact them on 01670 632 460 or mobile 0791 666 4174. Email info@unitedgrouptravel.com, and they've got a website which is unitedgrouptravel.com. There's no strangers on their tours, just people you haven't met yet. Big thanks to them for their sponsorship. Big thanks as well to Media Arts, and they supply all the video technology. If you want to become a member and get a cup, a pen, a membership card, and a scarf, then get your smartphone and put it over this QR code. It will take you straight to the membership pack. It's a £25 one-off fee. You can also go to NUFC Matters website and search membership pack to book today. If you want to help the channel, then subscribe to it by hitting the subscribe button. Hit the thumb up under the video to like the video and click share to share to your other social media. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. Don't forget, we help the food bank on this channel. If you want to do so virtually, go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk and make a donation today. The Alan Shearer raffle is back on. 150 tickets, £1 a ticket. Win a limited edition signed Alan Shearer ball. Enter today at nufcmatters.com.
Okay, there has been a little bit of a fallout, as usual, on the NUFC timeline on Twitter today. It stemmed from the club announcement that the membership ballot is underway for the very first game. And it was the last paragraph, really, which got fans up a height, which said seats are allocated randomly. So you could be allocated tickets in any area of the stadium with the ticket range of £44 to £74 for an adult ticket, or the applicable concession rate where applicable. This did cause a bit of a stir, some of it humorous. Toon polls for £74 against Villa. I'd want to be sat next to Eddie Howe, he said. This one by Craig, he says, buy a membership for £37. You might be able to get a chance of a home ticket. You might sit where you want. You might pay £44 or £74. If you want to go to every home game, it's over £1,100. Would be £500 cheaper for a season ticket. We aren't selling season tickets. This prompted the Supporters Trust, and I know that Newcastle United Supporters Club are also at this moment talking to members and going to put out some kind of press release and probably contact the club direct. But they showed their concerns with this particular letter signed by Greg Tomlinson, the chair, and all of the committee members. It's a bit of a nightmare, this, Ben. The club do need to do something about these things, but other highlights in the communication from the club included random ID checks on people going to away games, which I've got to be honest, I think a lot of people agree with, because there is a great deal of buying away tickets and selling them on to gain the loyalty point to try and cheat the system a little bit. So I think that went down quite well with supporters. But it's as always, in times of hardship, as we are in the minute with increased energy bills, etc., the fact that, if you are lucky enough to get a ticket, then it could be as much as £74. That's very expensive, Ben. And I think the club have got this wrong. And looking at all the YouTubers, looking at all those supporters with influence, you might say, those who are, organisations which are democratically voted for, like Newcastle United Supporters Trust, who the club have to deal with as part of the Premier League rules. I haven't seen one person who's happy with this, Ben.
Yeah, I think that the ballot process has been very confusing, and the price range, as you say, is high, and there is a big discrepancy between 44 and 74, and that extra 30 quid is obviously a large amount for many people, especially, as you allude to, in times of hardship. So I think the club need to clarify the situation here, and the fact that the seats are random and you could succeed in the ballot, but at a price range that you're not comfortable with, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think that they have got this one wrong, assuming that the ballot will run as I understand it to be. And I think that when you do a ballot, it will be an indication of high demand. So I'm sure from Newcastle's point of view, what they're arguing is that there's so many thousands of people compared to seats available because how well Newcastle are doing that want to apply and want to enter the ballot, that they've got no choice but to just pick at random. But that means that you might not be seated with people that you want to be next to. And it also means that you might not be in a price point that you're comfortable with. And again, that may be because there's so many thousands of people and they want to say, we couldn't get you your preference or a cheaper option, but you have been selected for a more expensive option. So I've not been on the online ballot system, but if it's sensible, you'll be able to select filters or options that say, I would like to enter the ballot, but I would only like to be considered for a set price. So then you're not going to have your time wasted where you're told you're successful, but you're landed with a ticket that's too expensive. And then as far as I'm aware, which is the confusing part to me, and you may know more than me, but as far as I'm aware, in addition to being randomly allocated as an individual with no guarantee where you sit, I do think that you can do a group application where one individual is the so-called lead applicant, and then consequently you can try and apply on behalf of effectively multiple people together through one individual. Now, I may be wrong on that, but that was my understanding. So the clarity there is if you're successful with that lead applicant on behalf of a group, then presumably that group can all sit together. And if that's the case, then it means that if you obviously are friends or family, you're not worried about being dispersed throughout St. James's Park. So I think that it's complicated because if too many people do group applications, then does that mean that if one group's selected, that another group is going to miss out, and then lots of individuals are going to fill all of the seats around them and could be put absolutely anywhere at absolutely any price?
Just found the line here. Supporters will be asked to input card details if they are successful in the ballot. Payment will be taken and the season ticket holder will be notified by email. Those that are unsuccessful in the ballot will not be contacted and will not be charged. Please note, travel groups cannot be facilitated in the ballot. Friends and family that meet the eligibility criteria can book together through the linked family and friends functionality.
So that sounds like there's a limited group booking, but it's very confusing. And obviously, when you do a ballot where you don't tell people they've been unsuccessful, you have a load of people hanging on, wondering when's the ballot coming out. So I think there's a few bits of clarity needed. Number one is, when are people going to be informed they're successful? So people that are not successful are aware, if they've not heard by that date, that they haven't been successful.
24 hours, I think. 24 hours.
24 hours. And then obviously, number two is just, how do you negate the fact that someone might be desperate for a ticket, but only want to enter a ballot at £44, and they might be successful and they might be told they're charged £77, and that might not be within their price bracket. And I think that Liverpool fans did a big protest, didn't they? After tickets were proposed to go above, I think it was £69 at the time, and the club were forced to U-turn and keep the prices down. So I understand that Newcastle have got huge demand, and I also understand that in theory they could probably charge what they like. But this isn't about charging what you like to make money because you've got demand. This is about respecting the fact that it's a community club, and that those in the Northeast have been hit hard by things like increased energy bills, cost of living. So if you're going to be a true community club and you're going to celebrate success, effectively 12 months on or 16 months on from fighting relegation, then the prices should be affordable to, you know, the everyday Newcastle worker based on the everyday Newcastle wage, to give every single Newcastle fan that has suffered under Mike Ashley and was worried about relegation the opportunity to come and see their football club at an affordable rate. That's my opinion. This isn't a brand like Manchester United that could fill it with thousands and thousands of tourisms. It's not a club experience when you go down that has stadium tours and museum visits on match days to the degree of Manchester United or a Chelsea. So I think it's really important that the club don't forget their roots and just have a price surge, even though they themselves have gone through hardship during COVID. I think it's important that the prices reflect the everyday fan, I think is the slightly rambled point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, Spurs fans not happy today as well with their ticket increase. That's their problem. But this is what happens when there isn't a lack of communication at Newcastle. You can't say that, but it very much seems to be like a do as we say kind of attitude, which I think has rattled a few fans. Let's get back onto football. Let's talk transfers and potential incomings. Ben, lots of talk around Livramento. The Tyne talk seems to have died down, but with Ashby all but announced, I guess, as going out on loan to Swansea this season. I would imagine there's going to be some kind of full-back acquisition at some point. Which one do you think is more likely?
Sorry, I think we just cut out there. I missed the name.
Yeah, well, we got Tierney linked in the early part of the window, but we've also had heavy links with Livramento, talks of Newcastle potentially putting money for, putting bids in and being way short of what Southampton are looking for. I guess an outside run has been Hall as well from Chelsea, another one who's been linked. So if you were a betting man, Ben, which one would come to Newcastle, do you think?
I think Livramento is still a very realistic possibility, and he's had a torrid time with injuries, which might lean him towards wanting to do one more season at Southampton, get fit and play regularly. But the player's keen on that move. It's just been about agreeing a fee with Southampton. And the beauty of Livramento is that he can be a right-sided fullback, so therefore a backup to Trippier, but he can also play on the left side. So he might be converted or get more game time on the left side, which is obviously the area that Newcastle are trying to strengthen. And Livramento is keen on that move. Chelsea were considering buying him back as well because they've got a buyback option, but Livramento was not particularly enthused by that because the logic was that he'd be bought by Chelsea and then loaned back to Southampton. I don't think anything got particularly serious with those talks, but it shows you that Livramento didn't really want to be bought and loaned back because maybe he would feel like a commodity. And also there's not that many pathways on the right or the left-hand side at Chelsea because they got Reece James, Malo Gusto, and then obviously Ben Chilwell, Cucurella can play on the left-hand side. And this is also why Lewis Hall might have to leave as well. So Hall is on Newcastle's radar for sure. I'm not aware that they've made a bid at this point, but I think the feeling in the Chelsea camp, Hall is here in Chicago at the moment, is that he'll be available. Him and Trevor Chalobah both on the market. And Newcastle might look at Hall, but he's obviously younger, still one for the future. And I sense with Livramento, Newcastle think that he could really play now and be thrown in when fit, because when he was playing regularly for Southampton before his injury, he was absolutely outstanding. With Kieran Tierney, the interest is genuine for sure, but Newcastle haven't moved because at the moment the player's indicated that he's prepared to fight for his place at Arsenal. I think when we discussed this last, I made one really key point clear, which is that Tierney had to speak to Arteta first to determine what his game time is. And then Arteta had to understand whether or not Tierney was prepared to fight for his place. And I think the feeling at the moment is because Arsenal are going to have a lot of big games due to qualifying for the Champions League, that Tierney would quite like to, at least until January, see what happens at Arsenal. And that's why at this point, Newcastle haven't moved. But if Tierney becomes available on the market and for a reasonable price, then I think that there is a chance for sure that Newcastle move. But at the moment, it's all sort of panning out quite neatly as far as Dan Burn is concerned. And I'm sort of torn because I appreciate, if I take the sentiment out of it, I appreciate that there's someone you could bring in that would be of a slightly higher standard than Dan Burn in that position. So if Newcastle are being really brutal and thinking about challenging in Champions League, then starting left back is definitely an area they can still strengthen between now and the close the window. But if I think about Dan Burn's performances, if I think about Dan Burn's personality, if I think about the chemistry and unity of the squad, the sentimentalist in me says, give him a chance. play him until January, let him be part of the Champions League, start him, because the back four last season was so consistent. And then if Newcastle is trying to be top four and trying to progress in the Champions League, and you realise he's a bit exposed at that level, then move a little bit later. So my heart says I'd love to see Dan Burn get an opportunity, but my head says Newcastle need a starting left back.
Matt Targett's had a decent pre-season, so I mean, do you think Newcastle would be, I want to get this across because a lot of people have been talking about pace. I think you mentioned it at the start of the show. Newcastle could probably wait till January. It wouldn't be a disaster going into the new season with this back four, would it, Ben?
No, not at all. I mean, they won the best back fours in the Premier League last campaign, especially in the first half of the season. It's just whether or not, with the level of games, you need depth. And it's also whether or not Burn and even Targett are deemed to be quite right for a team challenging for Champions League. We went into last season with lower expectations. So you looked at that back four and also the depth around that back four, and it was amazing because it was quite clear that they were not going to be a back four that would be in any real danger of relegation. It was obvious on paper they'd be a back four very capable of contending for a top half finish. And then 15 games into the season, it was obvious that actually they were a back four or a back five, if we include Pope, that were very capable of challenging for European football. And now they've got it. And then as a consequence, you don't sit on your laurels. So now you have to say, well, if we thought 12 months ago they were a mid-table back four, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, I just mean in terms of capable of at least getting as minimum Newcastle to mid-table. If that was the opinion 12 months ago, has it now changed? And does Eddie Howe think that the back four is a top four back four? Or does he just think they're a back four that got Newcastle into the top four? And I think in the case of Targett and Burn, it's probably the latter, that he still feels that he'd be more comfortable with a left back coming in that can add and improve to the back four. So consistency is a great thing, and so is the chemistry, and so is the form that they were in last season. So you have to pay respect to that. But I just think if we were saying, how can Newcastle in a really tough season now guarantee Champions League football again, and at worst get out of their Champions League group, I would still want a new left back to come in. That's just my opinion.
Any other ins and outs that you've potentially see at Newcastle before the 1st of September, Ben?
I think they'll still be relatively busy, but they have financial fair play to obviously consider. So that's why we kind of can't get overexcited about some of the links that are being made. We should potentially keep an eye on a couple of young signings that might come in, because it's going to be about depth and still maybe some Premier League experience as well that Newcastle might go for. So I would keep an eye on a player at Salzburg called Omar Soleil. He's one on Newcastle's radar and would like to come and play in the Premier League. He's not young, but he's in his early 20s. He's very physical, 6'4", no nonsense kind of defender. That's a name that Newcastle have on their radar. It's more other clubs at the moment pushing for defensive midfielders. And obviously because Newcastle have brought in Tonali, they may not choose to move anymore in that direction. But, Tonali's kind of more a number 8, even though he'll get billed as a central midfielder or at times a defensive midfielder. He's not really a number 6. So could Newcastle look for a number 6? I know that some people think that they may move on Tyler Adams, and it's believed that Chelsea could be in the mix there. And he has, by all accounts, got some form of relegation release clause in inverted commas. I'm not entirely sure if that's a specific number. Leeds would like to keep Adams, and he's battling back from a hamstring injury. But that could be one to watch between now and the end of the window. But I also think what Newcastle will do, which will be more important than most, is they'll play a couple of games and they'll get to maybe a week before the window shuts with a variety of different targets. And then they'll decide if another flurry is needed. Because if you're a team that's always been in Champions League or around Champions League, you maybe know where you're at. But the thing about Newcastle is that, 16 months ago, they were in a relegation danger and a lot of the squad is still there. And then they started the season, and I remember we were speaking about it. It was quite kind of mediocre, and there was almost disappointment of, why are we not scoring more goals? Why are we not doing better? And then right up until the World Cup, they were red hot. And after the World Cup, not too bad. And then there were a few wobbles, and then they finished the season strongly. So who's the sort of real Newcastle here? Because a lot of these players are the same. So then obviously when you then head into this season, the aim has to be European football. So what if they play 2 games before the window shuts, or 3 games, or however many it is, and they win, lose, draw, and they're not scoring that many goals, and they're conceding a few goals, and everyone's a little bit unsure. Have they got enough depth? Are they lacking something? That's when I think you'll see the PIF and Eddie Howe really push for a late flurry. But those will be almost transfers and adjustments and decisions made based on how the season starts, rather than overloading the squad now. And that's why I think that Newcastle might be working right up until deadline day, but I think their decision making may be influenced by how the first few games of the season starts.
Financial fair play, you mentioned those 3 little letters. What did you make of the fine that Chelsea accepted?
Well, I think the fine from Chelsea's point of view was down to the old ownership, not the new ownership. So this has nothing to do with Chelsea's 600 million spend over the last few windows. This is down to financial fair play under Roman Abramovich. And what the new ownership group did was actually proactively report the discrepancies under financial fair play and find a resolution. And it comes down to what's called incomplete financial reporting. And this is why when Chelsea's new owners, Bowley Clearlake, completed the takeover, they withheld some money off the sale price for tax purposes and potentially incomplete financial reporting, because they knew that it was a rush deal due to the fact that Chelsea's license was expiring. And when you do a rush deal, there's always a danger that you cannot do complete due diligence. You obviously try it to the best of your ability, but they were under a timescale. So quite sensibly, Clearlake Bowley said, if there's any liabilities that are still potentially outstanding, we will withhold an amount off the sale price, because we may need that to put towards this kind of thing. So then obviously, having taken over the club, they've then been able to do effectively, whilst in control, full due diligence and assessment of the finances. And it's become apparent that under Roman Abramovich, there was incomplete financial reporting. So then they went to UEFA, they accepted that they were in breach of the rules, and they've agreed a settlement of 10 million euros or 8.5 million pounds. So I think there's nothing really to see here in many ways. Maybe when some people saw the fine, they think, oh, Chelsea are in breach of financial fair play because the new owners have spent crazy amounts of money. But this is actually the opposite. This is Roman Abramovich not completing appropriate financial reporting, and then the new owners seeing that, declaring that, and taking their punishment.
Yeah, Juventus were fined as well, weren't they? I think UEFA confirmed that they were fined 20 million for financial fair play breaches. I mean, again, 10 million euros, not a massive amount, Ben. And, I've seen a few Newcastle fans on Twitter discussing the fact, well, why don't Newcastle just go and breach it? But, ultimately, Newcastle do that, then they'll be made an example of. There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
but also the Chelsea situation was different because it was Abramovich and then new ownership. And as soon as the new ownership were alerted to the problem, they agreed a settlement. With Juventus, it's very different because Juventus had a settlement with UEFA. Then there were subsequent revelations about capital gains violations. And now UEFA are reserving the right to effectively reopen the case against Juventus, which might result in even more sanctions going forwards. And we've obviously seen a points deduction from Serie A as well. So Juventus have had to take this punishment, but it isn't only a financial punishment. Remember, they've also been banned from playing in the UEFA Europa Conference League as well. And that will have financial implications such as television rights, game revenue, and prize money. So all in, even though people are sometimes dismissive of the UEFA Europa Conference League, I would have thought that Juventus are really losing out on 60, 70, 80 million euros at a minimum, because you're talking about potentially 10 games if you go all the way that you're not going to play, and gate receipts. You're talking about prize money. You're talking about television money. You're talking about less sponsorship money going forwards if they are negotiating new deals, because maybe there's less games, and there's obviously a bit of a tarnished reputation at the moment around the club as well. And you might find that certain players don't want to come to Juventus without any European football. So this is not a good situation that Juventus are in. But, you know, the historical challenge with financial fair play has always been that the punishments are not necessarily stringent enough. So as you say, maybe you just take the punishment, take the fine and move on. But remember, the financial fair play rules are changing going forward. So anyone now in breach that's not a historical case might be punished more severely. And the second point is that if I was Newcastle, I'd still be looking more at Juventus than Chelsea in terms of, if in breach, who's to say if it's significantly in breach and intentionally and brazenly in breach that you wouldn't find yourself banned from European competition. And that's the last thing that Newcastle want. So there's really no need for Newcastle to be playing games or to be trying to find a loophole within the rules, because this is a long-term Newcastle strategy. Just because they've got Champions League football now, they're going to be quite patient with their finances to make sure that in 3 to 5 years, they consolidate the club, they make it sustainable, and they have regular European football. If they just get Champions League once and say, yikes, we need to spend £500 million or something insane, then if they don't get Champions League next season, they're stuck with a bigger squad, bigger wages, and they'll be less flexible in the market because they've spent all their money in one window. So I almost think that Newcastle want to test the water. They want to add quality. They want to enjoy the Champions League. And then they want to see where they're at in January and next summer. Because if it's Champions League again, then they'll be more confident in spending more and more and more, because they'll start to understand that there's some stability behind that regularity of European football. Whereas at the moment, as exciting as the project is, it's only a one-off. So even though from a football point of view, Newcastle have to be highly ambitious, from a financial point of view, they have to be a bit more cautious.
Ben, as always, an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Enjoy the rest of your time in America. Safe trip back. We'll speak to you when you get home. Take care, Ben.
Look forward to it. Have a good week, everyone. All the best.
We still do 7 NUFC Matters show a week for free. But if you want to help support NUFC Matters, then there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast and video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications bell so you don't miss a single show. If you want to help us financially, then you can join the channel using this button, with the membership starting at $1.99 a month. Or you can drop us a donation in the chat using a super sticker. We're also looking for sponsors. If you'd like your brand advertised on the flyers for the show and featured during the ad break, then email John at nufcmatters.com to arrange today.